Mornings at Sparks always started the same way. I woke up at 6:30, even without an alarm clock, a habit developed over decades of work. Today was no exception. The soft morning light filtered through the clean cotton curtains I changed every spring. My 78 years were making themselves felt with a slight stiffness in my joints, but I kept myself in good shape. Daily exercise, walks with Chester, and proper nutrition were my secrets. Winifred Huxley was always a stickler for discipline and order. My house on Willow Street greeted me with the usual morning sounds: the quiet ticking of the floor clock in the living room, the light hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The house wasn't new, built back in the 70s, but I kept it in immaculate condition. The natural wood floors shone with regular polishing. The furniture simple but high quality and well-maintained was decades old. I put on my favorite blue cotton robe and headed for the kitchen, on my way to pet Chester, my elderly beagle, who was already waiting for breakfast, sitting on his tidy bed. "Good morning, buddy," I greeted him, and the dog wagged his tail happily. The kitchen, with its classic white cabinets and neat tile floor, was the heart of my home. Little had changed over the years. The same solid oak table, the same comfortable chairs, the same collection of china cups from which Herbert and I had drunk coffee every morning for 43 years of our marriage. I turned on the coffee maker, a quality but not flashy model I'd bought last year, and pulled out the bills, neatly folded in a folder. Accounting pedantry is second nature, and it doesn't let up even in retirement. My gaze involuntarily lingered on a photograph in a simple silver frame on the wall. Herbert, my husband, was smiling broadly, standing beside his truck. His eyes, blue and clear, seemed to still look at me with love and tenderness. 15 years had passed since a heart attack had taken him right behind the wheel, on the highway between Salt Lake City and home. He was only 63. "Miss you, old bear," I whispered as I did every morning. Coffee filled the kitchen with a familiar aroma. I sat at the table going over the bills and automatically adding up the numbers in my mind. Electricity, water, phone, insurance, all within budget as always. Not because I couldn't afford more, but because I didn't see the need. Herbert and I come from working-class families, but through hard work and prudent frugality, we've always lived decently. He was a long-haul truck driver, and I was an accountant for Horizon Insurance Company, modest salaries but stable. We saved a little from each paycheck, invested in safe stocks on the advice of my colleague from the investment insurance department. "We're ants, Vinny, not grasshoppers," Herbert liked to say with a wink. Wisdom is knowing when it's time to stop procrastinating and start enjoying. That time to enjoy never came for Herbert. But his foresight proved prophetic. By the time of his death, our investments had grown to an impressive sum. The insurance paid out by the moving company after his death was also substantial. All this, along with my pension and dividends from my investments, made me a wealthy woman. Much wealthier than anyone would have guessed. But who would have suspected? Winifred Huxley, in simple but quality clothes with a neat haircut and manicure, I did it myself every week, was wealthier than most of the people of Sparks. An irony that made me smile quietly at times. The phone in the living room rang, interrupting my musings. "Good morning, Mrs. Huxley," came a cheerful voice. "It's Doris from the pharmacy on Main Street. Your prescription is ready. You can pick it up any time." "Thank you, Doris. I'll stop by this afternoon." I hung up the phone and marked my trip to the pharmacy in my day planner. Blood pressure pills are a concession to age, but I took them more as a preventative. My 5-year-old Toyota Camry was in excellent condition. I had regular checkups and oil changes. Not the newest model, but reliable and economical. Outside the window, Sparks was waking up. A neighborhood boy passed on his bike, heading to school. A young Martinez couple from a neighboring street were having their morning jog. The town changed. New stores popped up, old ones closed. But its soul remained the same. A working town where people knew each other by name and said hello when they met. "That's what it's all about, isn't it, Chester?" I said, pouring food into his bowl. "We belong here. Our roots are here." My son Lowell didn't realize that. He left Sparks as soon as he had the chance. College in Reno, then a career as a tax consultant, married Tavia, a woman with ambition the size of Mount Whitney and an equally cold temper. They moved to an upscale Reno neighborhood, had 2 children, my grandchildren, whom I saw mostly in photos and video calls for the holidays. I didn't blame him for wanting more. Isn't that what Herbert and I worked so hard for? So that our boy would get an education so he wouldn't have to count pennies to a paycheck like we did when we were young? But somewhere along the way, my son lost something important: respect for the simple things, for honest labor, for living a life that is not ostentatious. He began to look at me and my lifestyle with ill-concealed condescension, as if I were a loser who couldn't do better. "Mom, why don't you move to something more modern?" he would say on rare visits, looking around my cozy but not luxurious home. "Why?" I replied. "I'm comfortable here." It was an ongoing argument between us. Lowell thought I should live in a condominium with 24-hour security or a decent nursing home. Tavia looked around my house with barely concealed disappointment every time she visited, as if she expected poverty and squalor to justify her rare appearance. "Your place is nice," she said in a tone that implied otherwise. Tavia, with her impeccable manicures and designer clothes, felt out of place in my simple but well-kept home. She ran a recruitment agency for high-paid professionals, a job she was very proud of and which she felt gave her the right to judge others by the outward signs of success. I finished my coffee and washed my cup thoroughly, setting it back down. My relationship with my son and daughter-in-law had always been difficult, but in recent years it had become even more strained. I knew the reason. They thought I was old-fashioned, out of touch, unable to understand their desire for status and showy success. "Mom, at your age, you have to think about comfort," Lowell said on his last visit. "This neighborhood isn't what it used to be." I just smiled. The neighborhood had indeed changed, more diverse, with new families of different ethnicities, but the people were still kind and helpful. Mrs. Chen from across the street brought me homemade buns on the weekends. The Rodriguez family from the corner helped with snow removal in the winter. The young Wilson couple often invited me over for barbecues. They didn't know about my financial situation. Why would they? So they'd start treating me differently? So they'd visit more often in hopes of an inheritance? Or worse, to ask for money for another necessary purchase? I went into the living room and opened the mahogany secretaire, the only truly expensive thing in the house, the one I'd inherited from my mother. In it, in a neat folder, were documents: account statements, stock certificates, trust agreements. Behind the simple numbers was a fortune that would surprise anyone who knew me as a modest pensioner. It all started with the $5,000 that Herbert and I had saved for a down payment on this house. Then there were small but regular stock investments in reliable companies. When Lowell received a full scholarship to college, the money set aside for his education also went into an investment portfolio. When Herbert died, the insurance payout and his retirement savings added significantly to the capital. I wasn't greedy and didn't deny myself the necessities. I just didn't need ostentatious luxury and status things. I traveled, modestly but regularly, usually with groups of retirees. I visited most national parks, traveled to Europe twice. I donated to charity, anonymously through a trust fund. I bought good, quality things that lasted for years, not changed at the whim of fashion. That was just me, practical, rational, preferring substance to appearances. Glancing at my watch, I noted that it was time to pack. Today was book club meeting day at the local library. We were discussing a new novel, which I read with gusto, making notes in the margins of my e-reader. I changed into simple but elegant pants and blouse and put on modest but quality jewelry pearl earrings, a gift from Herbert for our 20th wedding anniversary. She combed her hair in front of the mirror, noting that it was time to make an appointment with the hairdresser. Her gray hair was neatly cut into a practical haircut that didn't require elaborate styling. As I walked past the office, I noticed a folder on the desk with the paperwork for the new house. I'd bought it a month ago, a beautiful mansion in Lake Ridge, Reno's most prestigious neighborhood. $5 million, a sum that would make Lowell and Tavia choke on their expensive champagne. It wasn't an impulse decision. I've been thinking about this move for a long time, not for revenge or a desire to impress, but because it was time for a change. My longtime friend Eleanor died of cancer 3 months ago, before I could realize many of my dreams. Her passing made me think about my own life and the time I have left. "Don't put life on hold, Vinny," she told me a week before she died. Our later is shorter than we think. So I decided to take her advice. The new house wasn't just an expensive purchase. It was a symbol of a new chapter in my life. A house with spacious rooms flooded with light, a garden where I could grow roses, a kitchen where I could host guests, rooms for my grandchildren if they ever wanted to stay overnight. I wasn't going to stage a dramatic reveal in front of Lowell and Tavia, but I didn't want to continue to put up with their condescending attitude any longer either. It was time for honesty, for new beginnings, for a life without compromise or excuses. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Lowell. "Mom, how are you?" "I'm fine, son," I answered calmly. "I'm going to the library. Why?" "Just calling to see how you're doing. Tavia and I were thinking of stopping by this weekend." I smiled involuntarily. They never just stop by. "Did something happen?" Pause. I could almost see him exchanging glances with his wife. "No, Mom. We just want to see you." "I'll be home this Saturday," I said. "Come over for lunch." "Great," he said, a little too cheerfully. "I'll see you Saturday then." I hung up the phone and thought, they wanted something. Maybe it was that plot of land I'd inherited from my parents again, or something new. It doesn't matter. A lot of things would change in a few days. I grabbed my bag and car keys, checked that Chester had enough water, and left the house. The day was clear. The neighbors waved at me, minding their own business. Winifred Huxley, 78 years old, a millionaire in plain clothes, was preparing to start a new chapter of her life. Without pretension, without gloating, but with a quiet determination to finally live by her own rules. I was going through Eleanor's things, neatly putting them in boxes. Martha had asked me to help. She was having too much trouble doing it alone, and I knew her mother better than anyone. "Aunt Viney, what should we do with these albums?" Martha asked, holding up the tattered photo albums. "Keep them, dear. It's all your family history in there." Martha nodded and carefully placed the albums in a separate pile. She looked so much like Eleanor when she was young, the same brown eyes, the same easy smile. "You know," she said, sitting down next to me on the couch, "Mom always said she only had one regret." "What's that?" "That she never let herself live for herself, always saving for later, saving up for a future that never came." I stared at the framed picture of Eleanor and me at the high school graduation, so young, with a twinkle in her eye and a belief in endless possibilities. "She dreamed of a lake house," Martha continued. "She'd been saving for it all her life. And when she finally saved enough, the doctors diagnosed her." Martha's words echoed in my head as I drove home. Eleanor had died without realizing her dream. And how long did I have left? 5 years? 10? More? Less? No one knows their time limit. At home, the first thing I did was to go to my secretary and pull out a folder of financial documents. The numbers on the statement spoke for themselves. I could afford a lot more than a modest house in Sparks and occasional bus trips. The next morning, for the first time in years, I slept in until 8. Chester whined softly at the bedside, wondering why his mistress had broken the routine. I patted him on the head and smiled. "A new chapter begins today, buddy." After breakfast, I called Sunset Realty, a real estate agency whose ads regularly appeared in the local paper. "I'd like to schedule an appointment with a realtor," I said to the girl who answered the phone. "I'm interested in houses in the Lake Ridge neighborhood." "Of course, ma'am. May I ask your price range?" I thought for a moment. 3 to 5 million. There was a pause. "I'm sorry, did you say $3 to $5 million?" "That's right," I confirmed, holding back a smile. "When can I meet with the realtor?" The next day at 11 o'clock in the morning, I met with Cassidy Forrest, a leading luxury real estate specialist. She was an elegant woman in her early 40s, with impeccable hair and a perfectly fitted suit. She tried to hide her surprise at seeing me, an older woman in a simple tweed coat and comfortable low-heeled shoes, but her raised eyebrows gave her away. "Mrs. Huxley?" she asked when I introduced myself. "Pleased to meet you. Let's talk about what you're looking for." We settled into her office, which was spacious, with stylish, minimalist furnishings and a view of the mountains. "I'm looking for a house for myself," I began. "Spacious, bright, with a large garden, preferably 1-story or with an elevator, and a good view." Cassidy nodded, making notes in her notebook. How many bedrooms do you need? At least 4. One for me, one for guests, and a couple of rooms for the grandchildren if they ever decide to visit. I see. Did you choose the Lake Ridge neighborhood for any particular reason? It's beautiful, quiet, has a good infrastructure and great views of the lake, I said. It's also close to Reno, where my son and his family live. She nodded again, but there was an unspoken question in her eyes. I decided not to torture her further. I understand your surprise, Ms. Forrest. An old woman in modest clothes interested in a $5 million mansion is unusual. But I assure you, I am quite solvent. I pulled a folder out of my purse and handed her the documents, account statements, investment portfolio reports, stock certificates. Cassidy looked over the papers, and her professional mask trembled for a moment. Impressive, Mrs. Huxley, she said, handing the documents back. I apologize for my surprise. You see, it's not every day. It's not every day you have millionaires who don't look like millionaires, I finished for her with a smile. I understand. Don't worry about it. The conversation went easier after that. Cassidy showed me a portfolio of homes available on the market, and we scheduled some viewings for the coming days. There is one important condition, I said before leaving. I want the purchase information to remain confidential, at least until the deal is finalized. Of course, Mrs. Huxley. Confidentiality is our priority. Over the next 2 weeks, I viewed 7 houses. Each was beautiful in its own way, but none evoked the awe I expected to feel. The 8th house was special. Perched on a hill overlooking the lake, it immediately caught my eye with its clean lines and natural integration into the landscape. 2 stories high, but with an elevator, with spacious rooms flooded with light and an amazing garden designed by a renowned landscape designer. It's Alan Pierce's work, Cassidy said proudly as we walked through the garden. He rarely takes on private projects. I nodded silently, admiring the artful plants and elegant stone paths. Herbert would love it here. He'd always dreamed of a large garden. Inside the house was even better. A spacious kitchen with an island in the middle where you could cook for the whole family, a cozy library with built-in bookcases, a master bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a spa-like bathroom. What do you think, Mrs. Huxley? Cassidy asked when we finished looking around. It's perfect, I replied, not hiding my emotion. How much? The owner's asking $5,200,000, but I think we can negotiate. No need. I shook my head. I'll pay the asking price if the deal is finalized quickly. Cassidy's eyes widened. Are you sure? We usually recommend— I'm sure, I said firmly. This house is worth every penny. When can we start listing? The buying process was more complicated than I expected. Endless paperwork, inspections, approvals. Cassidy was patient and competent, guiding me through every step with professional confidence. Usually these transactions take several months, she explained. But since you're paying cash and the current owner is interested in a quick sale, we can get it done in 3 weeks. I visited my bank where the account manager, who knew me as a modest depositor with a decent but not extraordinary balance, was shocked when I requested access to my investment accounts for a major purchase. Mrs. Huxley, he said, studying my inquiries, I didn't know you. He hesitated, choosing his words. That I was so rich? I finished for him with a smile. Minus Mr. Jenkins, at our age, one learns to appreciate privacy and modesty. He nodded, still looking surprised, and proceeded to do the necessary paperwork. While the buying process was underway, I started planning the move. I had to decide what to take with me to the new house and what to keep or give away. Old things accumulated over the decades: photos, books, dishes. Each item carried a memory. I was sitting in the living room going through photo albums when the bell rang. It was Lowell. Mom, did you remember we're coming on Saturday? Of course not, I answered. I'll expect you for lunch. Okay. We have to talk. I tensed. When Lowell talked like that, it usually meant he wanted something from me. About what? Let's do it when we meet, okay? Nothing urgent. I agreed, already guessing what it might be. Probably another attempt to convince me to sell the house and move closer to them, or more likely, another request for money for some profitable investment. After the conversation, I went back to my scrapbooks, but my thoughts returned to the new house. I hadn't planned on telling Lowell and Tavia about the purchase until the very last moment. partly because I didn't want to hear their advice and help in choosing, and partly because I wanted to see their reaction when they found out that their poor old-fashioned mother had bought one of the most luxurious houses around. It wasn't revenge. I'm not that petty. Rather, it was a way to finally show the real me without masks or compromise. The next day, Cassidy called with the news. Mrs. Huxley, the owner has accepted your offer. We can close the deal in 2 weeks, and there's more. He's agreed to vacate the house early, so you can move in almost as soon as you sign. That's wonderful, Cassidy, I said, genuinely pleased. Thank you for your work. If you need help moving or settling in, I can recommend some great companies. I thanked her and promised to think about the offer. After the call, I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out a calendar. If everything went according to plan, by Saturday's meeting with Lowell and Tavia, I would be the official owner of the new house. Perfect timing for the news. I started making a list of things I would take with me. Herbert's pictures, of course, his rocking chair that he liked to sit in the evenings, the collection of books we'd collected together, Mom's antique carved mirror. Then I made a list of things to buy. New furniture for the living room and dining room, modern appliances, maybe a new bed, the one I had served me well for almost 30 years. But I wanted something special for the new house. For the first time in a long time, I felt the excitement, the anticipation of change. It was as if I was shedding the invisible weight I'd been carrying on my shoulders all these years, the weight of expectations, conventions, habits. Over the next week, I quietly and methodically prepared for the move. I packed my things when no one was watching, made arrangements with the movers, chose new furniture through online catalogs. All the while, I kept my usual routine, going to the store, meeting friends at book club, walking Chester on familiar routes. No one suspected that things would soon change. Even my neighbor Edna, who usually noticed the slightest changes on our street, had no idea of my plans. On the eve of signing the papers, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I lay in the dark, thinking about my life in this house. Lowell's birth, his first steps right here in this living room, long evenings with Herbert at the kitchen table as we planned the future. The last few years, quiet, measured, predictable. I had no regrets about the life I'd lived. Herbert and I were happy in our own way, in simplicity, in honest labor, in planning a future that, as it turned out, looked nothing like we had imagined. In the morning, I put on my best suit, an austere but elegant navy blue ensemble that I usually save for special occasions. Today was just such a day. Cassidy and the seller's representative were waiting for me at the notary's office. The paperwork was ready. All the checks had been passed. All I had to do was sign the papers and hand over the money. "Congratulations, Mrs. Huxley," Cassidy said when the last signature was made. "You are now officially the owner of one of the most beautiful houses in Lake Ridge." She handed me the keys, a heavy keychain with a silver leaf-shaped key ring. "When do you plan to move in?" "Tomorrow," I answered, feeling strangely calm. Everything was already organized. On the way back, I stopped by the new house, my home. I walked through the empty rooms, imagining what they would look like when I was settled in. I stood on the terrace admiring the view of the lake and the mountains in the distance. Herbert would be pleased. He always said that one day we would live like kings. He didn't live to see that day, but part of his dream did come true. Back home, I called the moving company and confirmed the time. Then I pulled out the photo album with images of the new house Cassidy had prepared for me, professional shots of every room, the garden, the views from the windows. Tomorrow, Lowell and Tavia would see those pictures. They'll see them and realize they've been wrong about me all these years. That their poor, old-fashioned mother was a much more complicated person than they realized. I didn't expect them to apologize or admit they were wrong, but I hoped that maybe it would make them see me in a new way. See the real me, not the image they'd created for themselves. I woke up at 6 in the morning, even though Lowell and Tavia hadn't promised to be here until 2 in the afternoon. Old habits are hard to break, especially at my age. Waking up early, though, gave me time to prepare properly. Chester, sensing my excitement, didn't leave my side all day. The clever dog could always sense a change in mood. "It's going to be a tough day, buddy," I said, scratching him behind the ears. I pulled an apple pie out of the oven, my mother's recipe that Lowell had loved as a child. The smell of cinnamon and baked apples filled the kitchen, making me nostalgic for a time when we were a real family. The clock in the living room struck 2, but my son's car was nowhere to be seen. Typical. They were always late, as if my time was worthless. At 2:45, I heard the distinctive sound of his Audi's engine. Lowell liked to drive fast and noisy. Tavia was the first one out of the car, wearing a white pantsuit that must have cost more than I'd spent on clothes in a year. Her flawless hair didn't budge as she bent over to retrieve some kind of package from the back seat. Lowell, in a light blue shirt and designer jeans, looked as trim and well-groomed as ever. My son wasn't what you'd call handsome, but he always had the imposing posture and pleasant facial features I'd inherited from Herbert. I opened the door before they even rang the bell. "Lowell, Tavia," I nodded, letting them in. "It's good to see you." "Mom." Lowell hugged me awkwardly, patting me lightly on the back. Tavia gave me a dry smile and handed me a bag. "We brought wine and cheese. I hope you have some decent glasses." I silently accepted the package. Decent glasses. Like I was drinking wine out of tin cans. "Sure," I replied calmly. "Come on in. I was just baking a pie." We settled into the living room. Lowell and Tavia sat on the couch, and I sat in the chair across from them. Chester, usually friendly with the guests, kept to himself, as if sensing the tension. "So," Lowell began after exchanging the usual pleasantries about the weather and traffic. "Was there something you wanted to talk about?" I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "You were the one who called and said you had something important to talk about." Lowell glanced over at Tavia. She nodded faintly. "Yes, that's right. We wanted to discuss your future, Mom." I poured tea for everyone and set the cake on the table. Tavia predictably declined, muttering something about diet. Lowell, however, cut himself a slice. "My future?" I questioned. "What exactly are you worried about?" Lowell coughed. "Mom, you live alone in an aging house. The neighborhood is getting worse. Tavia and I thought it would be best for you to move to a place where you'll be taken care of." "A nursing home, you mean?" I asked directly. "It doesn't have to be a nursing home," Tavia interjected. "There are great independent living communities for seniors. They have all the amenities, on-site medical staff, lots of activities for socialization." "And how am I going to pay for this great community?" I inquired. "We can sell this house," Lowell quickly replied. "Despite the condition and the neighborhood, it would still fetch a decent amount of money. Plus your pension." "My pension barely covers utilities and groceries," I said. "We'll help," Lowell said, though it was clear from his tone that he wasn't enthusiastic about the idea. I leaned back in my chair and looked at my son carefully. "What's the real reason for this conversation?" Lowell fidgeted. "What do you mean?" "Lowell, I've been an accountant for 42 years. I know how to put 2 and 2 together. You never used to worry about how I live my life. What's changed?" Tavia threw her husband an annoyed look, as if to say, "I told you so." "Okay," Lowell sighed. "There's one more thing. Remember that plot of land your parents left you? The one on the outskirts of Reno?" "Ah, that's the thing. The land. 6 acres that was once considered unbuildable because of its proximity to an industrial zone. Now, with the city's expansion, it's become attractive to developers." "I remember, of course. What about it?" "We got an offer from a development company. They want to build a shopping center there. They're offering very good money." "And that money is going to pay for my senior community?" I asked. "Not only that," Tavia interjected. "Lowell doesn't say everything. We have the opportunity to become minority partners in this project. But it requires a down payment. That's it. They didn't just want the money from the land sale, they wanted to be able to use it for their investment." "How much are they offering for the land?" I asked. $800,000, Lowell answered proudly, as if he'd earned the money himself. I almost laughed. The lot was worth at least twice that much, even without the development plans. "And you think that's a good deal?" "Mom, it's a great offer." Lowell raised his voice. $800,000 for land that's just sitting there idle. "Lowell, I may be old, but I'm not stupid. That plot of land is worth at least $1.5 million in today's prices." Tavia snorted. "What makes you think that? You hardly even leave the house. How would you know current real estate prices?" I ignored her invective. I refused to sell the land, and I refused to move into a nursing home either. Lowell blushed, a sign that he was beginning to lose patience. As a child, it always preceded a temper tantrum. Mom, be reasonable. You can't live alone forever. What if you fall? What if there's a fire? Who will help you? I have neighbors who care more about me than my own son, I replied, feeling the irritation building up inside. Those neighbors are a bunch of losers and immigrants, Tavia muttered under her breath, but loud enough for me to hear. Watch your language in my house, I said sharply, surprising even myself. There was a tense silence. Lowell finished his tea and set the cup on the table with a clatter. Mom, I'm trying to help. We're both trying, but you're making it impossible with your stubbornness. I'm not stubborn, I'm independent, I countered. There's a difference. Tavia rolled her eyes. Winifred, face it. Your house is falling apart. Your pension barely covers your expenses. You're living like… She hesitated for words. Like what, Tavia? I pushed her. Go ahead. Like an old, lonely woman who's afraid of change. She finished more softly than she'd intended. I stood up and walked to the window. Beyond it, I could see my small garden with its neat beds of tomatoes and herbs. I'm not afraid of change, I said quietly. On the contrary, I'm more ready for it than you think. Lowell let out an exasperated sigh. Mom, we're going in circles. The fact is, you need help, whether you want to admit it or not. I don't need help, I said firmly, turning toward them. I'm fine. Okay? Lowell raised his voice, getting up from the couch. You call this good? An old house with a leaky roof in a neighborhood where it's scary to walk after sundown? Neighbors who barely spoke English? Furniture that should have been replaced decades ago? Lowell, Tavia said warningly, but he couldn't stop now. No, Tavia, stop beating around the bush! He turned to me, his face contorted with anger. Mom, it's time to face the truth. You're living in this dump because you're a beggar. Because you've spent your whole life saving every dime, denying yourself everything. And where has that gotten you? To a miserable existence in this wreck you call home. There was a heavy silence in the room. Tavia stared at her husband with her mouth open, clearly shocked by his outburst. Chester whimpered quietly and hid under the table. I expected to feel anger or resentment at my son's words, but instead I felt a strange relief. At last the masks had been dropped. He had finally said what he really thought. Are you done? I asked calmly. Lowell seemed only now to realize what he'd said. His face went from red to pale. Mom, I didn't mean it like that. I'm just upset that you won't let us help. I held up my hand, stopping his excuses. No, Lowell, that's exactly what you meant. And you know what? It's a good thing. It's good that you finally said what you really think. I went to the secretary, pulled an envelope out of the drawer, and came back to them. I was going to tell you later, but I think now is as good a time as any. I took the glossy photographs out of the envelope and held them out to Lowell. What are these? He asked, reluctantly accepting them. My new house, I answered simply. I'm moving in tomorrow. Lowell stared at the pictures in bewilderment. Tavia leaned over to get a better view, and her eyes widened. I mean, that's the mansion in Lake Ridge, she exclaimed. The one that was put up for sale last month. That's right, I nodded. $5 million. I paid full price, no haggling. Lowell looked at me incredulously. Mom, if this is a joke… It's not a joke. I took the purchase documents out of the envelope and put them on the table. You can check. It's all done and paid for. The movers will be here at 10 tomorrow morning to move my stuff. Lowell grabbed the documents with trembling hands. His eyes raced over the lines, trying to comprehend the information. But where did you get that kind of money? He finally squeezed it out. Your father and I have always been frugal, I replied. We invested wisely. After he died, I continued that practice. Over the years, I've accumulated a decent amount of money. A decent amount? Tavia laughed nervously. $5 million isn't a decent amount. It's a fortune. I have a lot more than that, I said calmly. The house is only part of it. Lowell dropped the papers on the table and leaned back against the couch, his face a look of utter confusion. I don't understand, he mumbled. All these years, why you have lived so modestly if you could afford it. Because money wasn't an end in itself, I answered. It was a means of security, of independence. Your father and I didn't see the point of ostentatious luxury. But you could move to a better house, buy a new car, travel. And I did all those things, I said softly. I traveled modestly, but regularly. I have a reliable car that I'm completely happy with. And this house. It's where you were born, Lowell. It's where Herbert and I spent the best years of our lives. Why would I change it if it suited me? Tavia looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Her perfectly lined eyes narrowed as if she were trying to solve a complex puzzle. All these years, she said slowly, we thought you were barely making ends meet. You thought what you wanted to think, I answered without reproach in my voice. You saw an old woman in plain clothes living in a modest house and you drew conclusions. You never asked, never took a real interest. Lowell shook his head, still unable to comprehend what he had heard. But why did you have to hide it? Why didn't you tell us? What would have changed if I had? I asked. Would you have visited me more often? Would you stop looking down on me? Or, more likely, would you start asking for money for your projects, like you did today with that plot of land? Lowell flinched as if slapped. That's not fair, Mom. We've always taken care of you. Really? I raised an eyebrow. When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing, not to ask for something or suggest another way to help me that would actually help you? Tavia stood up, adjusting her immaculate suit. I think we need time to process all of this, she said, avoiding my gaze. Lowell, we should go. My son rose slowly from the couch. He looked lost, like when he was a kid and couldn't solve a difficult math problem. Mom, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I replied softly. Just know that I've always loved you and always will, no matter what. I walked them to the door. Lowell stopped at the door, as if he wanted to say something, but changed his mind. Tavia was already coming down the steps, hurrying to the car. Are you really moving tomorrow? He finally asked. Yes, I nodded. A new chapter of life. He nodded awkwardly and headed to the car where Tavia was waiting for him with an impatient look. I closed the door and leaned my back against it. Chester came out of his hiding place and walked over to me, whimpering softly. It's okay, baby, I whispered, leaning down to pet him. It's okay. The morning of the move was surprisingly clear. The sun shone through the curtains, illuminating the boxes neatly arranged in the rooms. I woke up earlier than usual at 5:30 and lay awake for a long time, listening to the familiar sounds of the old house, the creaking floorboards, the ticking of the floor clock in the living room, the distant hum of the refrigerator. Chester, sensing my awakening, came to the bed and rested his muzzle on the edge of the mattress. His brown eyes looked questioning, like he was asking, Is today the day? Yes, buddy, I patted his head. Today is the day we start a new life. I rose slowly, feeling a slight stiffness in my joints, a common condition in the morning despite regular exercise and walks. 78 years was taking its toll, though I'd been diligent about keeping myself in shape. I put on my robe and went into the kitchen where I put the kettle on. The teacups were already packed, except for one, my favorite, with a picture of English wildflowers, a gift from Herbert for our 30th anniversary. While the water boiled, I walked around the house I had lived in for almost 50 years. Every room held memories. Right here in the living room, Lowell took his first steps, holding on to the edge of the coffee table. The Christmas tree stood in this corner every December, filling the house with the smell of pine needles and the holiday. In this kitchen, I taught my son to bake cookies from his grandmother's recipe. But the house looked different now, half empty, with boxes instead of the usual stuff, ready to let me go to my new life. It was a strange feeling, a mixture of nostalgia, slight sadness, and anticipation. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. A crew of movers, 3 stout young men in uniform t-shirts, smiled welcomingly when I opened the door. Mrs. Huxley? The older of the 3 asked, consulting a clipboard. We're from Reliable Moving Company. Is everything ready? Yes, come in. I stepped back, letting them into the house. The boxes were signed, the furniture to be moved marked with yellow stickers. They worked quickly and professionally, carefully moving furniture and boxes out. I watched the process from a chair in the corner of the living room, the only place free from the hustle and bustle of the move. At 11:20, my cell phone rang. Lowell's name popped up on the screen. I paused, staring at the flashing display. After last night's conversation, I wasn't sure I was ready to communicate with my son. His words still echoed in my ears. "You live in this hole because you're a beggar." The phone kept ringing. I hit the reset button and put the machine away. Right now, I needed to focus on the move, and emotional conversations could wait. An hour later, Tavia called. I didn't answer her either. Then Lowell again, and again. By noon, my phone had accumulated 7 missed calls and a few messages I didn't bother to read. At 1 o'clock, the last box was loaded onto the truck. The crew chief held out a clipboard for me to sign. "Everything is loaded, Mrs. Huxley. We're off to a new address. Are you coming with us or on your own?" "On my own," I replied. "I need a little more time." When the truck left, I was alone in the empty house. Chester whimpered quietly, feeling the unfamiliar emptiness of the space. I slowly walked around the rooms one last time. The walls that had held echoes of laughter and conversation now seemed alien, ready to welcome new occupants. I stopped at the bedroom window, looking out at the garden where I planted tomatoes and basil every spring. "Goodbye, old friend," I whispered, referring not so much to the house as to the period of life it symbolized. As I stepped out onto the porch, I carefully locked the door. The keys were to be given to the new owners, a young couple with a young child who had bought the house through the same agency that had helped me buy the mansion in Lake Ridge. I got into the car. Chester settled into the passenger seat as he always did on our trips. Turning the ignition key, I took one last look at the house and slowly pulled away. The drive to Lake Ridge took about 40 minutes. The scenery changed with each mile. The modest Sparks houses replaced by more impressive mansions, the streets grew wider, the trees taller and more manicured. Finally, I turned onto the long driveway leading to my new home. A truckload of stuff was already parked out front, and the movers had started unloading. Cassidy, my realtor, was waiting on the steps holding a bouquet of flowers. "Welcome home, Mrs. Huxley." She smiled, walking up to the car as I parked. "Thank you, Cassidy." I accepted the flowers. "That's very nice of you." "I made sure everything was ready for your arrival," she said as she led me inside. "Electricity, water, heating, everything is plugged in and working. The security system is activated. Here are your key cards and codes." I entered a spacious hallway with a high ceiling and marble floor. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, creating a play of light and shadow on the walls. Chester sniffed the new space warily, his claws clawing quietly on the marble. "It's all so majestic," I murmured, looking around. "But it's yours now," Cassidy reminded me gently. "Let things find their places, and the house would get cozy in no time." The next few hours passed in the chaos of the organized move. The movers were bringing in furniture and boxes, and I was pointing out where to put things. My old furniture, good but modest, seemed somewhat lost in the spacious rooms of the new house. But I decided not to rush to buy a new one. Let things settle down first, and I'd get used to the new space. By 6 p.m., the movers were gone, leaving me surrounded by boxes and half-arranged furniture. Cassidy said goodbye, too, showing me how all the house's systems worked, from the heating to the complex lighting control panel. I stood in the middle of the living room, feeling a strange mixture of elation and confusion. This house, all the spaciousness, the elegance, the modern conveniences, now belonged to me. Me, Winifred Huxley, who had spent most of her life counting every penny and saving for the future. The future had arrived, and it was not at all what I had imagined. I opened the glass doors to the terrace and stepped out into the garden. The evening sun glinted off the tops of the trees, and the lake glistened in the distance. The air was clean and fresh, filled with the scent of pine needles and flowers. My phone rang again. Lowell for the 9th time that day. I sighed and muted it. Not today. Today belonged to me and my thoughts alone. Chester, settling into his new space, came over and rubbed his nose in my hand. I stroked him, and we stood together, watching the sun slowly sink below the horizon. "We're going to love it here," I told the dog. "You'll see." The first night in my new home, I hardly slept at all. The unusual silence, the absence of the familiar sounds of my old home, the too soft new bed I'd bought before moving in, all of it kept me awake. I lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about my life, about the choices that had brought me here. The morning greeted me with birds singing outside the window and sunlight flooding the bedroom. I rose slowly, still feeling the unfamiliarity of the new space, and headed to the kitchen to make coffee. The modern kitchen appliances baffled me at first. The coffee machine, with its multitude of buttons and settings, looked like a spaceship remote control. After a few failed attempts, I managed to make a decent cup of coffee and went out onto the terrace. The morning air was fresh and clear. The garden, professionally planned and maintained, was a work of art with colorful flower beds, neatly trimmed bushes, and winding paths. I took a sip of coffee and suddenly felt a strange calm. The decision, which at first had seemed impulsive, now felt right. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of a new chapter in my life. Around 10 in the morning, the doorbell rang. I was surprised. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the only people who knew about my move were Lowell and Tavia and the realtors. When I got to the door, I saw an elegant, middle-aged woman with a basket in her hands on the video intercom monitor. "Good afternoon," she said when I opened the door. "I'm Olivia Parker, your neighbor on the right. I wanted to welcome you to Lake Ridge." "Winifred Huxley," I introduced myself, shaking her hand. "Nice to meet you. I brought some homemade baked goods and information about our neighborhood." Olivia handed me a basket. "If there's anything you need, feel free to reach out." I invited her in, and we settled into the living room, where I'd hastily arranged a couch and a couple of chairs. "I apologized for the mess," I said, looking through the boxes. "I just moved in yesterday." "Oh, don't worry about it," Olivia said. "Moving is always chaotic. When my husband and I moved here 5 years ago, it took us a month to settle in." Olivia was a nice person to talk to, a retired literature teacher who had retired to gardening and community service. She talked about life in Lake Ridge, the neighbors, and local traditions. "We have a book club that meets every second Thursday of the month," she said, "and a gardening society if you're interested. And in the summer, we have neighborhood barbecues by the lake." "That sounds wonderful," I replied sincerely. "I'd love to join the book club." "Great. The next meeting is in a week, and we're discussing Anne Patchett's new novel. I'll send you an invitation." After Olivia left, I felt a slight thrill. New people, new opportunities. It was both intimidating and exciting for a woman who had lived in the same environment for decades. In the afternoon, I decided to explore the neighborhood. Putting on comfortable shoes and taking Chester on a leash, I went for a walk around the neighborhood. Lake Ridge was even more beautiful than I had imagined, with well-maintained streets lined with old trees, exquisite houses lined with greenery, and views of the lake from various points. Chester and I reached a small park by the water. There, on a bench overlooking the lake, I sat down to rest. An elderly man walking a golden retriever stopped nearby. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" He smiled. "I'm Walter Griffin. I live in the blue house on Cedar Alley." "Winifred Huxley," I replied. "I just moved into the house on Lake Road." "Oh, the big one with the terrace? Good choice. It's one of the best houses in the neighborhood." We got to talking. Walter, it turned out, was a retired history professor, a widower like me, with grown children living in other states. Our dogs, meanwhile, had gotten to know each other and seemed to find common ground. "If you like classical music," Walter said before saying goodbye, "there's a string quartet playing at the local cultural center next Friday. I'd love to keep you company." I agreed, feeling slightly embarrassed. Was it like a date at my 78th? When I got home, I noticed my phone was full of missed calls from Lowell and Tavia again. There were also messages that I finally decided to read. "Mom, please pick up. We need to talk." "Winifred, it's Tavia. Lowell and I would like to apologize for yesterday." "Mom, I'm worried. Let me know you're okay. The last text came an hour ago." "Mom, if you don't respond by tonight, I'm coming to a new address." I sighed and dialed my son's number. "Mom!" He sounded relieved. "Are you okay?" "Of course I'm okay, Lowell," I said calmly. "I'm just busy setting up the new house. Tavia and I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I said some terrible things that I didn't mean." "Yes, you did, Lowell," I said softly. And that's okay. You expressed what you really felt. No, Mom, let's not talk about that right now, I interrupted him. I need time to settle into my new home, and you need time to make sense of the situation. Let's talk in a week or two, okay? After a pause, he reluctantly agreed. I promised I'd let him know when I was ready for a visit, and we said goodbye. In the evening, after unpacking most of the boxes and more or less organizing the space, I went up to the second floor terrace with a glass of wine. The sun was setting, coloring the sky and the lake in shades of pink and gold. The view was truly breathtaking. I thought about money, about how strangely it affects our lives. I had been frugal most of my life, not out of fear of poverty, but out of a belief that money was a tool, not a goal. Herbert and I never chased luxury, settling for simple pleasures. Gardening, books, rare but heartwarming gatherings with friends. Now that I could afford almost anything I wanted, I found that my desires were actually quite simple. Yes, this house was luxurious, but its value to me was not in status or price, but in the comfort, the beauty of the surroundings, and the opportunity to start a new chapter of life. A month in the new house flew by. Every day brought new discoveries, from the hidden functions of high-tech kitchen appliances to secluded corners of the garden, where I could hide from the midday sun with a book. I slowly settled in, adding details to the space that made the house truly mine. Old photos on the walls, favorite books on the shelves, fresh flowers in vases. Olivia's book club welcomed me with open arms. I now spent every other Thursday discussing literature with a group of intelligent, enthusiastic people my age. Walter's invitation to a concert turned into weekly walks around the lake. We walked our dogs, talking about everything from the history of ancient civilizations to modern politics. Life was taking on a new direction, quiet but meaningful. I finally allowed myself to hire an au pair, Maria, who came twice a week to keep the big house in order. There was also a gardener, Jorge, who cared for the garden as lovingly as if it were his own. There was no word from Lowell or Tavia that month. After our brief conversation on moving day, they seemed to disappear. I didn't seek contact, busy settling into my new life, but sometimes I caught myself thinking about my son, wondering how he took it. One sunny afternoon, as I was having breakfast on the terrace, enjoying the view of the lake, Maria announced the doorbell. "Mrs. Huxley, your son and his wife are here to see you." I froze with a cup of coffee in my hand. The visit was unexpected. I hadn't invited them or told them I was ready for them. "Take them to the terrace, Maria," I said finally, spreading the napkin on my lap. Lowell and Tavia appeared on the terrace a minute later. They both looked impeccable, he in an expensive cashmere sweater and linen pants, she in an elegant dress and a pearl necklace around her neck. I noticed Tavia nervously looking around, assessing the house and the view. "Mom," Lowell stepped forward with an awkward smile. "You look amazing." "Thank you." I pointed to the chairs across the hall. "Have a seat. Would you like some coffee? It'll take Maria a couple minutes to make a fresh one." "Do you have a housekeeper?" Tavia couldn't hide her surprise. "Yes, Maria comes on Tuesdays and Fridays," I answered calmly. "At my age, it's hard to keep such a big house in order." They sat down, and there was an awkward silence for a moment. I decided not to break it first. Let them tell me why they had come. "Mother," Lowell began at last. "We wanted to apologize for the way we behaved last time. I said some terrible things I shouldn't have said." I nodded silently, waiting for him to continue. "We were shocked." Tavia entered, nervously adjusting the pearls around her neck. "It had all happened so suddenly, but now we realize that you just wanted to live for yourself, and that's completely understandable." Chester, who was dozing at my feet, suddenly raised his head and growled softly, looking at the guests. The clever dog always sensed falseness. "What can I do for you?" I asked bluntly, seeing no point in small talk. Lowell and Tavia exchanged quick glances. "We just wanted to see you, Mom," Lowell tried to feign offense, "to make sure you were doing well in your new home." "I'm doing fine, as you can see." Maria brought fresh coffee and cookies, set the cups down, and left. "What a lovely view," Tavia remarked, looking out over the lake. "This house must have cost a fortune." $5 million, like I said, sipping my coffee. "But I'm sure you're not here to discuss my expenses." Lowell set the cup on the table and leaned forward. Actually, Mom, we have a business proposition for you. Here it is. I mentally chuckled at my insight. I'm listening. Remember that development project we talked about? With the shopping center on the lot your parents left you? I nodded. Well, the situation has changed, he continued enthusiastically. Now they are planning not just a shopping center, but a whole mixed-use complex with offices, restaurants, maybe even a small hotel. And they're willing to offer much more, $2 million. And you want me to sell them the land? Not just sell it. Lowell became even more animated. We can become investors in the project. Can you imagine what an opportunity that would be? Given your, financial strength, we could come in as serious partners, not just minority shareholders. We talked to the main investor, Tavia said. He said that with an investment of $10 million, we could get up to a 20% stake in the project. The return is projected to be 15 to 20% per annum. I listened in silence, watching their excited faces. They didn't even try to hide their interest in my money. And you want me to invest $10 million in this project? I clarified. It's a win-win investment, Mom. Lowell tried to sound convincing. Tavia and I will put all of our savings into it, too. How much is that? They looked at each other again. Well, we have about $300,000 to spare, Lowell admitted reluctantly. But we'll be actively involved in the management of the project. So, I invest $10 million, you invest $300,000, and we become equal partners? I didn't hide my skepticism. Not exactly equal partners, Tavia corrected. Of course, your share would be bigger, but Lowell and I will take care of all the operations. You won't even have to do anything. I set my cup down and looked at them carefully. You know what surprises me the most? I asked calmly. It's not that you came to ask for money. I expected that. It's that you didn't even ask me how I felt in my new home. You didn't ask about my life. You didn't ask about Chester, who you claim to love so much. You just cut to the chase, as if I wasn't your mother and grandmother but an ATM machine. Lowell blushed. Mom, that's not fair. We're really worried about you. It's just, this is the kind of opportunity you can't pass up. How many times have you visited me in the last month? I went on. How many phone calls? None. But as soon as there was an opportunity to get the money, you made time to visit. Tavia pressed her lips together. We thought you needed space after, that conversation. Space? I shook my head. Or did you just not know how to deal with a mother who turned out to be not a poor old lady but a wealthy woman? They were silent, unable to find an answer. I will not invest in your project, I said firmly. And I won't sell the land, at least not to these developers and not on these terms. But, Mom, no, Lowell. The decision's been made. Tavia stood up abruptly, spilling her coffee. I knew it, she hissed. You've always been a cheapskate. Even when you got rich, you were still just as petty and suspicious. No wonder Lowell hasn't wanted to hang out with you all these years. Tavia. Lowell tugged her arm, but it was too late. I looked at my sister-in-law with slight sadness. This is the true cost of family relationships, I said quietly. Thank you for your candor, Tavia. Mom, she didn't mean it, Lowell began, but I held up my hand to stop him. Please go away. I need to think. They left Tavia in anger, Lowell in confusion. I stayed on the terrace looking out at the lake and stroking Chester, who now laid his head in my lap as if comforting me. The next day I called Archibald Donahue, a lawyer I'd worked with back in Sparks. He agreed to come to my house and we spent several hours discussing the details of my will. Are you sure, Mrs. Huxley? He asked when I'd outlined my plan. Your son might contest the will, especially if he feels deprived. I won't leave him without an inheritance, Archie, I answered. But most of the money will go to the things that really matter. We worked on the documents for 2 weeks. Archibald consulted with colleagues who specialized in charitable trusts to make sure everything was legally perfect. Finally, the will was ready. According to it, Lowell and his children received a house in Lake Ridge and $1 million, enough to live comfortably, but not so much that it would make them idle rich. Smaller sums went to the neighbors from Sparks, who had always been kind to me, and to Maria and Jorge, who had taken care of my new home. The rest of the fortune, about $20 million, was going to be administered by a charitable foundation to be established after my death. The Winifred and Herbert Huxley Foundation would support educational programs for children from low-income families, help the elderly in difficulty, and fund medical research into age-related diseases. "It's a wonderful plan, Mrs. Huxley," Archibald said as I signed the last document. "Your legacy will live on for years to come." After he left, I sat in my office for a long time, reflecting on life and the decisions that had brought me to this point. The money that Herbert and I had so carefully saved was now taking on a new meaning. It would not just provide me with a comfortable old age, it could change the lives of many people for the better. That thought made my soul feel warmer. A week after the lawyer's visit, I received a letter from Lowell A., real paper letter, not an email or a phone call. The envelope was signed in his neat handwriting that I would recognize anywhere. "Dear Mom," he wrote, "I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation and realized how wrong Tavia and I were. We really looked at you not as a mother but as a source of financial help, and for that I am ashamed. I'm not apologizing. Words won't change anything. But I want you to know that I'm rethinking my life and my values. Tavia doesn't share my opinion, and that has created tension in our marriage, but I have to follow my conscience. If you ever want to resume a relationship, on your terms with no expectations on my part, I'd be very happy to. If not, I will understand and accept your decision. Love, Lowell." I reread the letter several times. It seemed sincere, but I could no longer trust my son unconditionally. Too much had been said, too much had been revealed in the last few months. I decided not to answer right away, to give myself time to think. Perhaps, in time, the wound would heal, and I would be able to establish some kind of relationship with my son. But they would never be the same again. Meanwhile, my new life in Lake Ridge was getting busier and busier. I joined a local charity committee that was organizing a fundraiser for the town hospital. Olivia persuaded me to speak at a town council meeting to discuss the building of a new library. Walter and I began attending classical music concerts and exhibitions at the town gallery on a regular basis. None of these people knew about my condition. To them, I was just a new neighbor, a pleasant older woman who had moved to Lake Ridge to enjoy retirement. I didn't advertise my financial situation, preferring to be appreciated for who I was rather than what I had. One warm evening, I was sitting on the terrace with Walter. We were drinking wine and talking about a book we had both recently read. "You know, Winifred," he said, looking out at the sunset over the lake, "I'm glad you moved here. You've brought a fresh stream of life into our little community." "You're the ones who have all welcomed me so warmly," I smiled. I didn't expect to start a new chapter of my life at the end of my years. "It's never too late to start over," Walter raised his glass. "To new beginnings." We clinked glasses, and I thought about how right he was. At 78, when many people think that everything important is over, I discovered that life can be filled with new meaning, new relationships, new discoveries. I didn't know how many more years I had left, but I was determined to live them with dignity and meaning. The money that Herbert and I had saved all our lives was now not just a financial safety cushion, but also a means for good deeds, for helping those in need. My choice to direct the majority of my fortune to charity filled me with quiet confidence. It was the right decision, reflecting the values Herbert and I had always shared: hard work, modesty, helping our neighbors. Chester nestled at my feet, quietly slumbering in his sleep. The old dog, like me, had found a new home and new friends in Lake Ridge. Walter's golden retriever, Benji, became his constant companion on walks around the lake. Walter started talking about an upcoming music festival, and I was happy to keep the conversation going. The evening was beautiful. Life was full of possibilities, and I finally felt that I had found my place in the world, not as Lowell's mother, not as Herbert's widow, but as Winifred Huxley, a woman who had come a long way and was finally free to be herself. After all, isn't that what true richness is all about?